We're back. It is a delight to say, joined by one of the men I've come to admire most in the world. His name is Buck Revell, Oliver Buck Revell. He is a longtime professional in the public sector, working initially for the United States Marine Corps for 5 years, serving in uniform, and then for about 30 years as an agent and then as a senior executive of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. He is these days a principal of the Revell Group and a contributor to the public policy debate in a number of different forums. And I'm so pleased one of them is this, Securing America. Buck, welcome back. It's good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be back, Frank.
I want to start by asking you, when we first met, Buck, I think you were working the domestic terrorism problem focused primarily on the prospect that jihadists were in this country and might engage in acts of terrorism against us. These days, your old outfit, the FBI, is focused on a domestic terrorist threat, but it seems principally to be looking at white supremacists and other extremists of sort of racist character. At least that's what we're being told we're awash with. Do you regard that as a serious threat to our country and deserving of seemingly the principal, if not exclusive, focus of the FBI's domestic front?
Well, it has never been the greatest terrorist threat to the United States. There is a threat. I mean, we go back to the Ku Klux Klan and
Sure.
various right-wing groups that were active, but they've never been a threat to take over the United States. They certainly could cause substantial damage, but nothing like a 9/11. The closest we had to that was Timothy McVeigh in the Oklahoma City bombing. The only way they can support that is by the number of events, and a lot of these events are one person, one off. They're not representing organizational attacks.
Yeah.
The jihadists are representing a total across the board. Now, obviously, a lot of people that belong to that particular religion are not jihadists, but unfortunately, the ones that are fairly tightly controlled and influenced, and they continue to represent the most significant threat. I don't care what they're piping out of, the nonsense in Washington. When I talk to the agents in the field, including senior people, they still say, well, obviously our greatest threat is the Islamic. Now, we're getting more and more threats coming across the border.
Indeed.
From various elements, including Russians, Chinese, and Iranians. The Iranian threat has never been higher, and yet it's always been since the fall of the Shah. It has been a significant challenge to us in America.
Let me ask you specifically about one that we've been told was actually the greatest threat. Timothy McVeigh was a piker compared to the insurrection that was unleashed on the Capitol. It has apparently spawned the largest investigation in the history of the FBI. Do you regard that as, first of all, an insurrection, but second of all, as this monstrous internal threat?
No, it was a absolutely terrible and circumstance, and it needed to be dealt with immediately. It should have not been allowed to get out of hand. And those who were inside the Capitol who committed other crimes need to be prosecuted. Amen. But it certainly was never a threat to take over the United States. I realize people inside the building at the time were traumatized by it, and they should have had better security and protection.
Yeah.
But it is not a threat to take over the United States by any means.
Overthrow the government, for example.
No.
Yeah. And one of the questions that remains, and I don't know that the FBI is studying it, or for that matter, this January 6th committee, Buck, is why was the security so lax? Why was the president's suggestion that they bring in National Guard and man up for this? Or even have it at the steady, normal business level of security, to say nothing of heightened.
I'm looking forward to seeing the bottom line on that, because somewhere along the line, somebody certainly dropped the ball.
Indeed, and
Um,
I don't think it was an
and,
accident, comrade. But that's my that's my take on
well, that remains to be seen, but it needs to be determined exactly what happened, why
yeah.
it happened, and how to prevent it in the future. Not
Amen.
just at the Capitol building, but at any government facility.
Of course.
And I'm also the attacks against the government facilities across the country after, the situation in
The
Minneapolis.
summer of love.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I think that set a precedent that we're still living with. When people go that far, they've got to be brought to justice. I don't care which side of the political spectrum they fall on.
Amen. And the fact that they haven't been prosecuted, whether it set a precedent or it
Well,
simply
actually,
emboldened the bad
several have
guys.
been.
Yeah.
Yeah, several
Some
have been
some have.
prosecuted, but
Not
not as
nearly
many
enough.
as should be.
Yeah. Amen. Buck, let me turn to a slightly different um, enemy within problem, and that is, as you know, having spent your life inside the bureau, working among other things against state actors, the Russians, notably the Soviets before them, the Chinese. One of the things that we're facing is a concerted effort. There's more and more evidence of it. A friend of ours, Peter Schweitzer, has written an entire book about it, Red Handed, in which he talks about
Right.
how, American elites are helping the Chinese win. Talk a little bit about the problem of elite capture in the United States at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party and the extent to which it really represents a serious, well, counterintelligence problem for starters, but also a domestic security threat as well, perhaps.
Well, the Chinese are following the model that the Soviet Union set up, going after penetration through the universities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they have really honed that weapon to the greatest extent. I doubt if there's any significant university in the United States that doesn't have some funding coming through some front from the Chinese.
Right.
And of course,
To say
exchange
nothing,
students,
just
many of,
the students themselves, the
yeah,
substantial
and
sums that they're transferring in.
yeah. I don't want to see every Chinese student looked at as a spy, but
Right.
you need to be alert that their government, if they have family back home, can
Mm-hmm.
bring tremendous pressure, even if they're not doing it, of their own volition, and many are. Uh, you go way back and remember Larry Wu Tai Chin,
Mm-hmm.
uh, became a translator during the Korean War, came over and worked for the CIA, and stayed in the agency actively for 30 years, uh, and was never detected until he was retiring. Uh, the Chinese are willing to give their assets the open road to do what they think they can do and when they think they can do it, not nearly as demanding as the KGB was, or Russian
They're more patient.
Soviet intelligence.
Yeah.
And they say, get us what you can when you can.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out very well for them.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had
Buck,
drivers
let me
and
just ask you, because we're going to run out of time before we run out of things to talk to you about. But just
mm,
specifically, again, as a national security professional of long-standing and highly,
mm,
decorated accomplishment, should we be worried that if you look at the Hunter Biden's laptop, the commander in chief of the United States appears to be among those who have been deeply compromised by these Chinese influence operations and other acts of penetration?
we should know exactly what went on between Hunter Biden, the inner circle, before he was president, the president. I don't think it's continued, uh, but to him, although he hasn't ostracized and put Hunter outside of his inner circle.
Sure hasn't.
Uh, but there's more there than he shouldn't be allowed near government.
Mm.
I don't care what the president thinks about it being a son. If it was my son, he'd be ostracized. And frankly, I think from
Disowned, I
what
would
I have
imagine.
seen, yeah,
For sure.
there certainly is a lot there that needs to be fully disclosed and, if possible, prosecuted.
Amen.
Being son of the president doesn't make you immune from
Yeah.
prosecution.
Well, and unfortunately, to the extent that the big guy himself is
Yeah.
implicated in all of this, I would
Well,
think
we
that
need
that
to.
would not make him immune either, for that matter.
No, if you had evidence, but right now it's a matter of comment and hearsay. And sometimes people will say things to give themselves more gravitas than they might
Yeah.
have, but we don't know.
Well,
It's
I
certainly an area that needs to be
it does need to be very carefully
examined
examined, Buck. And
closely.
I
Right.
think that what we're increasingly seeing from the laptop is
Mm.
evidence that actual influence uh, in exchange for compensation of various kinds was undertaken. Lastly, and very quickly, Buck, I've only got about a minute left. We're going to talk with Ben Berquam about the border insecurity. I know you're
Mm.
very engaged on that issue, including with
Yeah.
your state government officials down there in Texas. Your thoughts on the character of what has been called an invasion and the security
Yeah.
threat that it poses?
I'm not political, but let me say this: if we have a change in government at the legislative level in November, one of the first orders of business ought to be a consideration of impeaching the governor or the president for failure to carry out his duties to protect the United States and its citizens. It
Amen.
is absolutely egregious and needs to be dealt with in the most positive way because it's got to stop.
Yeah.
And he or his administration is not willing to do it.
We have to leave it at that, Buck. Article 2 of the impeachment may be the Chinese caper, but I think you're right. Article 1 is the border. Buck Revell, thank you for your extremely important and distinguished service to our country over many years, and that you render these days at the Revell Group and by visiting with folks like us. I hope you'll do so again very soon, sir. In the meantime,
Glad
thank
to
you.
do it, Frank.
Stay
Keep up the
well.
good work.
You
You
too.
bet.
Ben Berquam's up next on the border right after this.